In the last video, we got a quick overview of doing function memoization inside of JavaScript. So we're now going to install the Lodash library into our project and use it to memoize one of our action creators so that it does not constantly fetch the same user over and over again. So I'm going to flip on over to my terminal. I'm going to stop my server with Control-C, and then I'll run npm install --save Lodash. This is going to take just a moment to install, so I'll just let it do its thing. And then once it's all done, I'm going to start my server back up with npm start as usual. All right, so npm start, and there we go. Everything launches back up. I'm now going to flip on over to my code editor, and I'm going to open up my action creators file. So inside of actions index.js, I'll first begin by importing the Lodash library up at the top, like so. Now, usually by convention, we import the Lodash library as the underscore character rather than calling it just like Lodash or something like that. All right, so now we can use Lodash to memoize our action creator. But just one quick pause. Remember, in the start of the last video, I had told you that this solution was going to involve changing just a couple lines of code, but it was also going to involve some really nasty syntax. So unfortunately, we cannot just kind of memoize this fetch user function and expect everything to work as expected. Instead, it's going to be just a little bit challenging. Well, let me show you why. We're going to try to apply the memoize function to our action creator right here, and you're going to very quickly see that things are not quite working as you might expect. Now, to apply memoize to this thing, I'm going to first rewrite it using the function keywords as opposed to arrow functions, just so that it's really clear in the syntax exactly what is going on. So I'm going to copy my fetch user action creator, and then I'm going to comment out the original one for just a moment. We're going to use this code again in just a moment, but I want to refactor this thing to use the function keyword as opposed to arrow functions just to make this more clear. All right, so now I'm going to put a new line right after async dispatch right here, and I'm going to turn this into a normal keyword function by putting in the function keyword, removing that arrow right there, and then I'll put in a new curly brace after the dispatch like so. So right there, normal function keyword. Now I'm going to do the same process on the arrow function up here. So I'll change it to function that gets called with ID and an opening curly brace like so. Now at this point, I would encourage you to do a quick save and make sure that you don't see any error messages like the one that I have right here. So let's figure out what's going wrong right here. Let's see, I need to return that thing for sure. And then I must have some other typo inside of here. Ah, that's better. Okay, so make sure that you've got no errors inside of your browser. Now, once you've got that all set up, we'll then attempt to memoize one of these two functions. So notice how there really are two functions here. There's the outer function and the inner one. So the question is, which one are we going to actually memoize? Well, let's just take a guess here and try to memoize the outer function first. So I'm going to say _.memoize. I'll place my parenthesis, and I'll place the closing parenthesis around the entire function like so, down here on the bottom line. So now let's save this and see if it solves our problem. Remember, in theory, now we are going to assign a memoized version of this function to the fetch user and export it from this file. And so in theory, we should only ever be allowed to call this function with a unique argument one time. And after that one time, we'll then just return whatever the previous return value was. So again, you might be expecting that this would solve the problem. All right, so let's save this, flip back over, and you're going to very quickly see that we're still making a ton of different requests here. So what's going on? Well, actually, this is kind of playing out with memoize exactly as you really would expect if you think about it. Every single time that we call this function right here, it's going to return whatever was returned the first time it was called. In this case, it is a function. We are returning this function right here every single time it gets called, even though it is memoized, because that is the purpose of memoization. We're not technically rerunning this code right here. We're not running the function again with the given ID, but we are returning the same function that was returned the first time. Because we are returning that function, Redux Thunk is still going to invoke that function. So Redux Thunk is still going to call this thing right here, right, with dispatch, and inside of there, we're still going to make our network request. So unfortunately, this is kind of expected behavior of memoize, but it doesn't quite do exactly what we wanted. So let's try the second option here. Let's try to remove the memoize out of the outer function. And I'm going to make sure I clean up the parenthesis down there as well. And then I'll try memoizing the inner function right here. So right in front of async, I'll put _.memoize. And then I'll make sure I put my closing parenthesis right there on line 21 for me. Okay, so now we are memoizing the interior or inner function. This is the one that actually gets invoked with Redux Thunk. So hopefully now, Redux Thunk will only be able to call that function one time and never again after that. All right, so I'm going to save this and we'll flip back over. And we'll very quickly see, hey, we're still making all these requests. So even with this approach, we're still running into issues and it's not doing what we expect. So why is that? Well, remember, every single time that we call this action creator, we are going to declare a new function. We recreate this function right here in memory every single time that we call fetch user. So we recreate this function and then we memoize it and return it. Now we definitely memoize the interior function right here. So in theory, it's not going to be called multiple times by Redux Thunk, but really remember what happens here. Every time we call fetch user, we're going to create a new version of the interior function and memoize it every single time. So even though we are memoizing this thing, we are memoizing a new version of the function every time we call the action creator. So every time we call the action creator, new memoized version comes out, and we can successfully call that memoized version, and the original interior function right here will be invoked because we are recreating it every single time. So, like I said, this problem is not quite as crystal clear as you might expect. So now that we understand why we cannot just throw memoize inside of here willy-nilly, let's take a quick pause, and we'll take a look at how we're going to solve this problem in the next video.